Good evening from Downing Street. He's going, but not yet. Boris Johnson will continue as Prime Minister until a new Tory leader is elected. And that is still causing some outrage, from serving ministers to the former Prime Minister, John Major. Labour said it will call a vote of confidence in the government to try to force him out immediately. But most Conservative MPs' attention has already turned to who will be the next Prime Minister. A series of people most voters have barely heard of are jockeying for position as the party grandees decide how the leadership election will work and, crucially, how long it will take. Tonight, one of the last Johnson loyalists gives us an exclusive interview to tell why the Prime Minister didn't apologise for the behaviour that caused him to be forced out, and claims in his last weeks of office Boris Johnson is not dangerous or seeking revenge.
The Prime Minister has accepted the opinion that was coalescing in the Conservative Party in Parliament yesterday. He has announced his resignation. He has not bust the constitutional norms, which people were saying this morning he might be about to do.
And here in Westminster, a battle for the soul of the Conservative Party is just beginning. How can Boris Johnson's successor unite the Tories, let alone the country, and rebuild shattered trust? How can the cost of living crisis be eased, the economy restored, peace and prosperity protected? I'll ask two backbenchers with very different views as the leadership contenders tussle for votes.
And I'm outside the venue for tonight's Spectator magazine's summer party. Boris Johnson has in the past made an appearance, no sign of him yet, but his Conservative colleagues on the way in were not keen to answer my questions about the PM's immediate future. But he says he's going, he hasn't gone. Is that damaging for the party? Is it damaging for democracy? Is it damaging for the government?
Well, the constitutional position is that the Prime Minister remains Prime Minister until another Prime Minister is appointed.
Gone, but not yet out. Boris Johnson has resigned as Tory leader, but in his departing message to the nation, he accused the MPs who forced him out of a herd mentality and vowed he would stay on as caretaker Prime Minister until the autumn. It was not an end of his choosing, but an end which came after wave upon wave of resignations from his government, leaving Mr Johnson's position simply unsustainable. With would-be successors already circling the ruins of his administration, with me now, our political editor, Gary Gibbon.
When a Prime Minister loses the job but hangs around waiting for the successor to be elected, that's normally a pretty uncontroversial bit of the story. We're normally focused somewhere else. But this is Boris Johnson, totally unconventional politician. And what happened today is that the battle for the premiership was lost, and we had a whole new battle that started up over the interim premiership. Should he be allowed to stay in that building and conduct things as normal? And such is the level of trust, the mythology around him as well in the Tory party. An awful lot of MPs have been lining up saying, well, no, actually, he shouldn't. And they've been reaching to try and find what levers they can pull to try and get him through a trap door and out of this building. And they haven't really come up with an effective one that would require a cabinet revolt. The brand new cabinet would have to stand up and say, you're going. That's almost certainly not going to happen. The most that MPs can probably do is speed up the process of choosing his successor. Boris Johnson has been trying to do his bit to smooth these waters a bit today by saying, don't worry, I'm not going to do anything controversial. But the tone that he used in his statement, as you just alluded to, left a lot of MPs feeling that there's unfinished business. He isn't reconciled to his fate here. He might just do something to upset them again. He might poke his nose into that leadership contest. But at some point this morning, Boris Johnson changed his mind about whether he was going to leave this building, hand over the seals of office, and the rest is history.
The podium of doom. The day after number 10 said it wasn't going to be needed. Watched by a now much reduced small band of loyal MPs, one of them tearful, Boris Johnson's wife, a small number of loyal ministers. They applauded him as he emerged to give the speech he'd done everything to avoid.
Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you. It is clearly now the will of the Parliamentary Conservative Party that there should be a new leader of that party and therefore a new Prime Minister.
He said he'd fought hard to stay in the job because he wanted to deliver on his mighty electoral mandate.
In the last few days, I've tried to persuade my colleagues that it would be eccentric to change governments when we're delivering so much. I regret not to have been successful in those arguments, and of course it's painful not to be able to see through so many ideas and projects myself. But as we've seen at Westminster, the herd instinct is powerful. When the herd moves, it moves. And my friends, in politics, no one is remotely indispensable.
Many MPs felt he was blaming them for his departure, not accepting he'd made mistakes. They noted his commitment to loyalty to his successor seemed pretty thin.
To that new leader, I say, whoever he or she may be, I say I will give you as much support as I can. And to you, the British public, I know that there will be many people who are relieved, and perhaps quite a few who will also be disappointed. And I want you to know how sad I am to be giving up the best job in the world. But them's the breaks.
He laid claim to his right to stay Prime Minister while a successor was selected. Normally a given, but in his case, hugely controversial.
I want you to know that from now on until the new Prime Minister is in place, your interests will be served and the government of the country will be carried on. Thank you all very much. Thank you.
If he was expecting previous occupants of number 10 to join in the applause, instead he got a reproach from Sir John Major. In a letter to the Tory backbenchers chairman, Sir John wrote, "For the overall well-being of the country, Mr Johnson should not remain in Downing Street." His alarm was echoed by many Tory MPs.
I think it would be better for the PM to go straight away, frankly, and that maybe Dominic Raab as the Deputy PM.
Because you don't trust Boris Johnson near the levers of power?
Well, I think trust has been lost, hasn't it? And I don't see how that will be suspended for 3 months.
You want Boris Johnson out of that building as fast as possible?
I think the last 48 hours, his unwillingness to accept the reality in front of him has actually hardened views even further, if that were possible.
Allies said Boris Johnson was only this morning convinced he'd lost the party, and last night was still working on a multi-billion-pound plan to try to stay put.
But it took him until this morning.
I think it could have been different. The calculation perhaps was that if we could have laid out a new economic programme with tax cuts next week.
It was a fight-back plan for me.
That might bring back some people.
Some people would say that was deluded, to give them the numbers who left the government and registered protests.
It didn't work.
Throughout the morning, more resignation letters were fired at Downing Street. There'd been a serious erosion of standards in public life. The Prime Minister's position was untenable. One brand new Cabinet Minister a day in the job wrote, "You've put us in an impossible position. Integrity, honesty and trust are broken. The country deserves better. There's chaos in number 10. The government simply cannot function with you in charge."
Do you regret supporting Boris Johnson?
But to stake his claim to nearly 3 more months in Downing Street, the Prime Minister rushed forward replacement appointments for cabinet jobs. They included one who'd spent the morning saying Boris Johnson must go.
It doesn't bring me any joy to say this, but what I'm seeing now is a spectacular lack of judgment, frankly.
Well, since we last spoke, you've gone into the cabinet. You're now working for Boris Johnson, who you wanted out of the building.
I'm working for the country. The big decision was made this morning by the Prime Minister to resign. It was the right one. If I'd been asked yesterday, I would have not served. Now that he's going, I'm able to come back on a caretaker basis.
Sure you can trust him?
He's going to have to listen to me and other senior former ministers like Greg Clark.
Good track record on that?
Well, he's got no choice.
I mean, what triggered this yesterday was 50 ministers resigning. And I struggle to see how on Monday the chaos and instability of this Thursday, Friday will become magically stability, continuity, competence, international confidence, given where we are.
And who he is.
Yeah.
Let's say there's a controversial story and you're a minister in this interim government, you have to go on the radio to talk about it, and you check your lines with Boris Johnson and number 10 beforehand. How's that going to go?
This is exactly why I think we should have an interim Prime Minister.
Because you can't believe a word he says?
Well, repeatedly lines that have come from number 10, maybe not from the Prime Minister directly, have been proven not to be true.
Amongst those staying at the cabinet table are the brand new Chancellor, Nadhim Zahawi. who at breakfast time this morning issued a statement calling on the Prime Minister to stop undermining stability and go now. Last night, that was also the message of the Attorney General, Suella Braverman. She also announced her candidacy to succeed Boris Johnson.
If there is a leadership contest, I will put my name into the ring.
Another early mover, backbencher and Boris Johnson critic Tom Tugendhat also signalled a candidacy with a tweet saying, "Now we need a clean start." The field of potential candidates could be very large.
Everything will happen very fast. Obviously, I'm seriously considering it, given that Conservative Home members do keep putting me consistently in their top 10.
Boris Johnson made clear at the first meeting of his new cabinet that it would not be making major changes of direction or new policy. Reassurance he hopes will cement him in post.
I think I'm going home.
Nothing can console this small band of loyal MPs leaving Downing Street after the Prime Minister's statement.
The country will rue this day.
They regret it like they did with Thatcher. Exactly. Yes, this will be a mistake.
Boris Johnson may have drained huge amounts of goodwill in recent weeks and months, but his electoral achievements remain, and the candidates to succeed him know it could be near impossible to match them.
Well, I've been speaking to the Brexit Opportunities Secretary, Jacob Rees-Mogg, who was in that small group of people who came out of Downing Street to watch Boris Johnson's statement earlier in his only TV interview since the Prime Minister resigned. And I began by asking him whether Boris Johnson should stand down and hand over to an interim, as many of his party members have suggested.
There's no constitutional precedent for a caretaker Prime Minister in the UK. Theresa May carried on as a caretaker Prime Minister whilst the leadership election was taking place. So the Prime Minister remains the Prime Minister until there is a new Prime Minister, as our constitutional convention.
But there's no need for a precedent, is there? I mean, there's no precedent for Boris Johnson, to be honest.
Well,
so, I mean, there's no reason why you couldn't do this.
Theresa May carrying on for, I think, nearly 2 months from when she decided she was going, announced she was going, works perfectly well. The Cabinet met this afternoon. It has made the decision not to do new and innovative things, but just to carry on with the business of government until a new leader is in place.
What does carrying on with the business of government mean? I mean, people are concerned, frankly, aren't they, that he could try and do radical things, take revenge, try and damage people that he, wants to take his revenge out on? Or
he won't. It's quite clear that is not what is happening. He has a consensus cabinet. He's brought back Greg Clark and Robert Buckland, people who are on the left of the party. Robert Buckland has been very clear that the basis of his service is a continuity and an orderly handover.
So what does that mean for things like the Northern Ireland Protocol?
Well, that bill is before Parliament, and the parliamentary pattern of business that was already announced will continue.
So that's the normal business of government. I mean, even though many people are very concerned about that, think it's illegal, it's one of the reasons some of them wanted him out.
It won't complete its parliamentary passage in this time. It will have further stages in the House of Commons, but it won't get anywhere near the House of Lords.
So he's not dangerous. That's what people are worried about.
The Prime Minister has accepted the opinion that was coalescing in the Conservative Party in Parliament yesterday. He has announced his resignation. He has not bust the constitutional norms, which people were saying this morning he might be about to do. He hasn't put the Queen in an awkward position. He hasn't done any of the wild and woolly things that were being bandied about. He has gone for a dignified resignation. He has appointed a cabinet of people from across the party. And this is important for all ministers, because we all have our individual roles, and I've been discussing inside the Cabinet Office, what are we going to do? We are going to carry on with things that are underway, that have already started. We are not going to be coming up with brand new ideas in the next 2 months, because the government doesn't really have the mandate to do that.
What did you make of his statement, though? I mean, you say it was dignified. Many people are upset that he didn't say sorry. Why didn't he apologise?
Well, he already had apologised. He'd done that earlier in the week. I think it was the right time for him to recognise that he was coming to the end of his period, that he had done very important things, that he'd won a mandate from the British people, to thank those who had served him and had served the country. and to make the point that nobody is irreplaceable, which is one of the great political truths. He has done his best. I think he has been an exceptionally good leader. I think he has led the country through remarkably difficult times, very impressively.
I was watching you during it. I mean, you looked a little emotional. I just wondered what you were thinking.
I'm never very emotional, actually. I was sorry to see him go.
Right. And
I've supported.
As simple as that.
As simple as that. I mean, I'm a great supporter of the Prime Minister's. I think he is an enormously capable man. But events turned against him and he resigned.
Right. Let's turn to the next chapter. I mean, you said to us you had no desire to serve another Prime Minister. Is this also the end of Jacob Rees-Mogg's cabinet career?
Well, that'll be for a new Prime Minister to decide. What I'm
interested... So if asked, you may say.
Well, it depends who asks me. Let's wait and see. Because what I think is interesting is where the country is going from here. We are facing, internationally, the greatest crisis in relation to inflation. And I'm afraid the Treasury has not been tackling that properly. It has not been focusing on the inflationary issue. It has not taken charge of quantitative easing,
so you
which
blame
it agreed.
Rishi Sunak for that?
I think Rishi Sunak was not a successful Chancellor. He was a high-tax Chancellor, and he was a Chancellor who was not alert to the inflationary problem.
Because he's the only man, according to the polls, who could beat Starmer.
Well, that's mainly to do with name recognition.
What is your epitaph on this week, this period of politics? What have we just witnessed?
What have we just witnessed? Well, we have witnessed a Prime Minister who delivered, who made all the big decisions right, who has been brought down by some relatively minor missteps that got taken out of all proportion. But that's the way of politics. Sic transit gloria mundi.
Krishnan speaking to Jacob Rees-Mogg there. Well, what timing. Tonight is the annual Spectator magazine summer party. Everyone in the political world is invited. In the past, Boris Johnson himself has made an appearance. No sign of him yet, but some of his colleagues have been coming in the last half an hour. Michael Gove, who was sacked by the Prime Minister a couple of days ago, has put his party face on and he's gone in. He smiled but didn't say anything. Matt Hancock, himself forced to resign as Health Secretary during the pandemic. He has gone in, smiling again, not really saying very much, which seems to be the theme of the evening. There can, inside there, for the Tory party, be only one topic of conversation, surely. The Prime Minister has said he is going, but he is not gone. And we put questions to people as they came in. They were reluctant to answer. Should Boris Johnson go now?
No, look, I mean, my view is the handover process sometimes is longer, sometimes it's shorter. But Whitehall is designed around it, and they'll have checks and balances in the process. He won't be allowed to do anything.
Have you told the Prime Minister he should go now?
I don't really want to have this conversation, I think. I spoke to the Prime Minister yesterday and I spoke to him first thing this morning.
But he says he's going, he hasn't gone. Is that damaging for the party? Is it damaging for democracy? Is it damaging for the government?
Well, the constitutional position is the Prime Minister remains Prime Minister until another Prime Minister is appointed. My responsibility, should I be re-elected on Monday, is to put together a leadership election.
How is Mr Johnson doing?
He's been on great form all day. Where are you from?
Channel 4 News.
Oh, fantastic.
And he's determined to stay.
Well,
even in the face
of
colleagues and MPs questioning his integrity, his willingness or ability to be truthful. He's happy to stay. And he thinks that's right. Well, of course, the next big question facing the Conservative Party is who will replace Boris Johnson when he goes. And here to talk about the runners and riders is our policy correspondent, Paul McNamara. I mean, who's in the race so far?
Well, the list of people who are considering putting their names in is now extensive, and a few of them are quite unexpected, or as one MP puts me in less kind terms, quote, frankly delusional. Remember, crowning the next Prime Minister is a two-step process. So firstly, Tory MPs will whittle it down to the two frontrunners themselves. Then it goes to the Tory party membership and they decide. So who's popular with the Tory party membership? Well, YouGov did a poll of Tory party members. Who do they like? Top of the list, Defence Secretary Ben Wallace. We'll go through the rest of this list in a second, but the only person at the moment to have actually declared that they will be putting themselves forward isn't on this list. It's Attorney General Suella Braverman. She's already got a team. She's already even got a Twitter account for her leadership bid. And while she might not be that well known among the membership, she is popular in Parliament with Brexiteer MPs. Back to who the membership like, though. They really like Ben Wallace, the Defence Secretary. He's consistently comes top of the polls among Tory voters. Next most popular is Penny Mordaunt. She hasn't declared yet, but she has got a team, and they are working quite hard, and they are quietly confident. They see her, I'm told, as a Thatcherite figure. Then you get Rishi Sunak, and this is an interesting one because, 2 months ago, he was written off. His green card with America, his wife's tax affairs being a non-dom. Now he's second favourite with the bookies. Less popular with the bookies, Liz Truss. She's a serious contender, though. MPs have been joking for months that her Instagram account has essentially been a campaign account. Her problem with the party, though, is that she's a Remainer, and Brexiteer MPs are adamant they will do anything to stop anything but a Brexiteer MP becoming the next leader. And then there's Tom Tugendhat. There are some issues with him.
Well, Tom Tugendhat, not being rude, he's quite junior, isn't he?
He is quite junior. He's never had a ministerial post, but he's had a really good run of being the Foreign Affairs Select Committee chair, and there is a lot of support for him. So there are rumours that candidates might need 20 MPs to back them to even get on the shortlist. I was speaking to one MP earlier on who backs Tom, said, "Have you got these numbers?" There was a smile and a nod there. They are very constant. 3 other names on the list. So we've got Jeremy Hunt. He was second last time round. As to be said, he backs himself more than the bookies do. And we've got Nadeem Zahawi. It's tricky for him, given on Tuesday when everyone else was resigning. In fact, here's Mr. Zahawi coming now. Let's give it a second. See him just coming.
See whether he'll confirm that he's standing.
Yeah. Mr. Zahawi, will you be standing? Are you a leadership contender, Mr. Zahawi?
He's only been Chancellor for a couple of minutes.
Only been Chancellor for a couple of minutes. We're not sure yet how long he'll continue being Chancellor for. He's off to have a good night now. Last on the list, we've got Sajid Javid. He gave a speech, his resignation speech in Parliament. A lot of people saying it had a ring of a leadership speech about it.
Paul McNamara, thank you so much. Well, that's it from us. Thank you, and back to Kathy.
Thanks, Jockey. Well, are there already any favourites among those runners and riders that Paul just set out? Joining me now, 2 MPs, former Cabinet Minister Damien Green and Andrew Bridgen, who was one of the first to call for Boris Johnson to go. Damien Green, you're backing Tom Tugendhat. Is he definitely standing, and are you running his campaign?
Yes, he's definitely standing. No, I'm not running his campaign. I am.
Does he have the numbers, though?
Yes, we've got a lot of support.
Right.
And
At least 20?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, right, OK.
Yeah.
So what does he need to do and stand for?
Well, indeed, anyone running should, I think, follow his example. He's standing very much for a clean start, a fresh start. I think it's advantageous he's not been in this cabinet, and he wants to combine cleaning up politics, cleaning up political life with, if you like, traditional Conservative economic values of pro-business, lower taxes, making a big effort to improve growth.
Well, Andrew Bridgen here is nodding along. I mean, I've never seen the 2 of you closer. Could you back Tom Tugendhat?
I don't think I could, but I can certainly back smaller government, lower taxes. I think people need security in the UK now. We need to make Britain safer by making Britain stronger, grow the economy, and it's about defence in troubled times, energy security and food security. And I'm looking for a leader who's got a policy to deliver that.
Let's zoom in on taxes a bit, because both of you mentioned that quite high up. Does the new leader, whoever that turns out to be, Damien, do they have to cut taxes and fairly radically, or can't we afford that as a country?
Well, I think we do need to cut taxes. I mean, the way left to me, I would help people through the cost of living crisis would be by partly by cutting taxes. I think that's a sensible and conservative way to do it. But it has to be done against a properly responsible framework of the tax and the economy, so that we're not just borrowing money to cut taxes. I think that would be risky.
No more fiscal incontinence then?
No, and we need to seriously look at fracking. We've got a £1 trillion of shale gas there. That could buy us 10 years of energy security. Well, we build the modular nuclear reactors and we could sell our surplus to the Europeans.
That would sounds give us, like money down the back of the sofa.
That would give us a lot of leverage when we're negotiating over the Northern Ireland Protocol.
Well, OK, you're also going to have to fund potential massive public sector pay increases. Is that top of the agenda? Because otherwise you're going to head potentially for an autumn or winter of discontent.
I think the problem with if we just as it were, give way and have big public sector pay increases is that instead of having an inflationary spike for a year or so, which is what I hope we're having now, that might make it endemic like it was in the 1970s. So that would create more misery and more poverty in the long run. So I wouldn't recommend that.
And Tom Tugendhat, without any cabinet experience, would be able to stand up to the unions, would he?
Yeah, oh yeah. I mean, Tom has fought in Afghanistan, and Tom has done things more dangerous than standing up to unions or facing the House of Commons.
Do you agree that the unions have got to be seen off?
We can't get into an inflationary spiral of wage rises chasing inflation, else Damien's absolutely right. As a fiscal conservative, that's the road to ruin.
You know what, I'm seeing a lot of agreement between the two of you, so let's get on to Brexit. Does it have to be a Brexiteer, Andrew, the new leader?
I think it does, because ultimately, believe it or not, our membership are far more right-wing than either I am or Damien is, and they will go for the Brexiteer in the final two.
I don't think they will. I mean, all the polling I've seen shows that, interestingly, the public out there, and indeed Conservative members out there, are much less obsessed with Brexit as a current issue than people often are here in Westminster. So actually, you know, it happened 6 years ago, it's happened, we have problems.
Damien's constituency voted Remain, mine voted Leave.
My constituency voted 61% to Leave, but my association, which is getting new members in today, it's actually growing, interestingly, in the wake of Boris Johnson's resignation. That they want to move on, they want to know what the government's going to do for them now, rather than what happened 6 years ago.
That's absolutely right. The people always want to know not what you've done for them, what are you going to do next? That's what wins elections, that's what gets polling success.
There's a whole load of water to go under the bridge before the new leader becomes installed. So an interim leader you could get by doing backing a confidence vote in Boris Johnson next week. You could get an interim leader, an interim Prime Minister installed, as John Major is suggesting. Do you back that?
No, I mean, if you have a vote of confidence in a parliamentary system, what happens is you then have a general election because the government's lost confidence. We don't have a presidential system. We have a parliamentary system where commanding a majority in Parliament is what matters.
Damien Green, apologies, we have no sound on you apparently, so you have both been silenced in your prime, but thank you very much for joining us. I hope we got the gist of that. Krish, let's go to you in Downing Street.
Yes, thank you. I think we got the rough idea of who's on what side, but what now for the country? Who actually gets on with the business of governing? Bronwyn Maddox is director of the Institute for Government. She joins me now, and Lord Kerslake, who was the head of the UK Civil Service. Bronwyn Maddox, first of all, I mean, some ministers have been reappointed, but not all. It looks vaguely like a government again, but is it really able to govern?
We don't know, but it is the government, and Boris Johnson remains the Prime Minister. There isn't really a word for what he is, a formal word, not caretaker or interim. He has the responsibility of putting together a cabinet and a government, and that government has the responsibility still for acting like a government, running the country, running departments and so on. It just is pretty constrained in what it can do compared to a normal government, because there are all kinds of conventions set out in the cabinet manual about what it's not supposed to do, like anything big or controversial that would tie the hands of whoever comes next.
Well, Lord Kerslake, we've already in this government had a few circumstances where senior civil servants have had to insist on a ministerial direction because they felt uncomfortable with what they were being asked to do. What do you think will happen now in government if the Prime Minister or his acolytes try and do things that are more radical than they're saying tonight that they're going to do?
Well, look, there is a clear precedent from Theresa May, as we've heard earlier, for a caretaker Prime Minister whilst the elections take place. I think the difference this time is the way in which the Prime Minister left and the reason he left, the loss of trust and the resignation of 59 ministers. So it's understandable that people are nervous, but I do think there can be safeguards put in place to avoid any kind of abuse during this period, and civil servants will have an important role in this. I think actually it would also be good if some of the more controversial plans or legislation that's underway now, such as the Northern Ireland Protocol, were postponed until we've got a new Prime Minister. I think that would be the right thing to do. So yes, there are risks. I understand why John Major is concerned, but I think those risks can be managed, and the civil service have to stand up to ministers if they think they are going beyond what would be reasonable or acceptable during a period of caretaker government.
Well, Bronwyn Maddox, Jacob Rees-Mogg earlier told me that the Northern Ireland Protocol, the media bill, privatisation of Channel 4, all those things, they will carry on because they are the programme of government and they won't be finished by the time Boris Johnson finally steps down. I mean, is that deliverable, or will politicians step in and say, well, hang on, you can't do that?
These are the big questions, and I'm not at all sure it is deliverable. There was a whole lot of controversial material in the gigantic Queen's speech that Boris Johnson put forward very, very recently. And you've named some of the controversial things there, Channel 4, privatisation, human rights, and separately the Northern Ireland bill. A lot of controversy in Parliament. I think it is really up to MPs now of all parties to say, look, we don't regard this as the kind of thing that should go through in the new circumstances. They are new circumstances. This is, no longer the same government. But we're down to conventions again. We're down to rules. I'm not quite sure what safeguards can be put in place beyond the ones we've been discussing, which is the conventions that are spelled out there, and then the pressure from civil servants and parliamentarians and indeed the public not to go beyond them.
Now, what about the next administration, the next Prime Minister? How much of a mandate will they have to do anything different? Are they tied effectively to what Boris Johnson's Queen's speech promised, or can they do anything different without calling a general election? Bronwyn first.
It's a good question. Yeah. I think they can do quite a bit that is different, but again, it's going to be testing the support that they have for whatever that difference is. Supposing they want to do something very different about Brexit or about the Northern Ireland Protocol, they would have to judge quite carefully what the mood in Parliament was. It's a weaker position than having got a mandate for the manifesto that you set out, but it doesn't mean that a new government can't do some things differently. It will be different.
And what's your view, Lord Kerslake? I mean, how lame will the new Prime Minister be without a new mandate?
Well, the reference point is the manifesto in 2019, because we elect governments, we don't elect prime ministers, and clearly there is a mandate to carry forward that manifesto. Where I think it becomes difficult is if a new administration, a new prime minister and their cabinet want to take government in a very different direction to that which was promised in the last election. And I think if they do, if they want to do that, in whatever direction that is, then I think a general election is pretty much essential to get things on the right footing. And just on this transition period, it's worth saying, of course, that we've got only a matter of weeks now before we reach the summer, and then we'll have the conferences and the appointment of the new Prime Minister. So there's not a huge period in which to get through.
Lord Kerslake, Bronwyn Maddox, thank you both. Cathy.
Well, it was the Conservatives' humiliating loss in 2 key by-elections last month, which helped to seal Boris Johnson's fate. So what are the voters saying about his decision to go? We're in 2 seats where the Tory vote is vulnerable to Labour and the Lib Dems. Our chief correspondent, Alex Thompson, is in Redcar in North Yorkshire. And Home Affairs correspondent Andy Davies is in Wells in Somerset. Let's go to Alex first. What's the verdict, Alex?
Well, a little early for a verdict, perhaps. Jury's certainly out there, displeased with Boris Johnson, whose personality, of course, plays such a huge role in turning those traditional red wall Labour seats blue for the Conservatives. And, when you speak to people, as we did this morning, first thing in Middlesbrough, and again this afternoon down the coast here in Redcar, it's there that you see just how much political capital Boris Johnson has squandered in such a spectacularly short time. Even those people here who still say they like the man, they like Boris Johnson, they like what he is, readily accept he had to go. And of course, a key facet of Boris Johnson's remit was levelling up, bringing jobs and investments. It is hoped to areas like this, where industries like steel, shipbuilding have long gone or are on their way into the sunset, replaced, of course, with what's behind me, the renewable future of wind turbine industries and offshore industries and so forth. So that's what brought the business secretary here this morning. Remember, he's one of those who did not resign, so quite a delicate dance for him today. Keen to show, well, even he couldn't say it's business as usual. Nobody can say that in the government, but at least business is being done.
For a government in ruins, desperate to rebuild, this is some backdrop. Business Secretary Kwasi Kwarteng in the desolation of the old Redcar steelworks, launching today wind power investment. But a Johnson loyalist who didn't resign, it looks awkward now, and he knows it.
And they half expected me to be part of the delegation to see the Prime Minister. And that really, I think, contrasted what real activity in a real place like this means with the political parlour games that are going on in Westminster.
There's going to be a Facebook Live, so please follow around 11:30. Ever the enthusiast for promoting Teesside and himself, the Tories' poster boy regional mayor, Ben Houchen, close to Johnson, so today is all about distancing London at all costs.
There's a wonderful contrast there, isn't there? The debacle that's going on in Westminster now as a result of the Prime Minister's resignation, paired with the start of manufacturing, the start of construction, the start of creating lots of good quality jobs in Teesside. And that's what my job is about, and that's what I'll continue to concentrate on.
A few days ago, they blew up the Redcar coke ovens at the derelict steel plant. The gaunt ghosts of past industry are fading, but the Tories' push for new wind energy investment here helped deliver this classic red wall seat for Boris Johnson. Now, though, like the steelworks, he's history, and the concerns of voters are pressing.
Cost of living is sky high. I mean, look at the bills, energy bills, you know, now they've gone through the roof, haven't they?
No, I feel like the current government actually have done quite well with this area developing, especially business-wise. So I think kind of continue on with that.
Cost of living, yes. The health service, of course. But people also just want honesty.
Stepping on from Boris, do what they say they're going to do and be honest with the people instead of covering people up.
So they've got to be honest and they've got to have integrity.
Honesty.
And integrity.
Everybody can make mistakes, but it's how you deal with those mistakes and learn from them.
But that's the number one for you guys.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Honesty
and
integrity.
So, memo from Redcar to Westminster. Sort out your new pecking order and do it fast. Then get on with the job. There's a tough winter ahead.
Well, a small taster of the way people are feeling here up in the northeast. Let's cross the country now down to the southwest and Andy Davis, who is in Somerset.
The Liberal Democrats have notched up some really notable successes in the southwest of England recently, seizing control from the Tories in Somerset County Council, sweeping aside that huge Tory majority in Tiverton and Honiton, memorably. And they know that the issue of Boris Johnson's leadership was a major factor for voters in those campaigns. This is one of those seats that they're going to want to target in the future. And here's a flavour of what some people here made of today's events in Westminster.
I was quite happy that he got in as Prime Minister. I thought he would make a very good one. But obviously, the way all the lies has been told and that kind of thing, I think the best thing for him to do is to actually go now.
Well, I'm overjoyed. He should never have been there in the first place. He's not got the integrity or the intelligence. So, you know, I'm main chuffed.
I think he's been ridden on by the press. The UK is very favourite of building people up and then knocking people down.
What would you like to see from the next Prime Minister?
Somebody who's honest. That's it.
What
Somebody
about
who's just honest and transparent. What about Sunak? Get him in.
Someone that the public can trust.
Well, all the things that Boris isn't, I think he's done a good job, but integrity and honesty, I think, is what we all need.
Who would you like to see as the next Prime Minister?
Well, there's so many of them gone that surround him, it's hard to pick out. All we see are faces and names we've never heard.
A few brief takeaways, I think. Very limited awareness of potential candidates, but they do want those candidates to focus on Ukraine, the economy, cost of living, and particularly, as you heard in Alex's report, honesty and integrity. There's no doubt that Boris Johnson resigning is going to make battles for seats like this in the future different types of battles. It's going to be fascinating to see how the Liberal Democrats approach campaigns here maybe differently to previous campaigns, and how voters will view the Conservative Party at the next general election. As some swing voters put it to us today, they are going to be looking very carefully at who that next Tory leader is.